Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Old Guard. As you know, we are flipping our agenda this morning and beginning with our invited speaker. And we are truly fortunate to have today as our speaker, US Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. She represents the 11th Congressional District of New Jersey, and that means for many of you, she is your representative in Washington. Representative Sherrill graduated from the US Naval Academy and then went on to earn a master's degree at the London School of Economics. She spent almost a decade in the US Navy and was a Sea King helicopter pilot. After her Navy duty, she earned a law degree from Georgetown. It's a real privilege for me to have a fellow Hoya as our speaker today. Mikie worked as a litigator for Kirkland and Ellis, and then as a federal prosecutor. She was elected to the US House of Representatives in 2018 and re-elected in 2020. Appropriately enough, she serves on the House Armed Services Committee, among other duties. Congresswoman, it's a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. The Zoom microphone is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see everyone on the Zoom, maybe next time in person. And I want to thank you for inviting me to come speak to all of you, and thanks for that introduction, and thanks to Jim for inviting me. I'll tell you a little more about our background. So I've been invited today to speak a bit about my background in the United States Navy. And I decided to go to the Naval Academy when I was in the 5th grade. I remember clearly, I was talking to my dad. He was, for some reason, building a Christmas tree stand. He always built his own stand, for I don't know why, with plywood. So we were out back building the Christmas tree stand, and he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a pilot like Grandpa. And as you guys can see from the screen, that's my grandfather. He served in World War II, and he was a B-24 bomber pilot and had been shot down over occupied France and rescued by the Free French. And I wanted to, he loved being a pilot. He always loved flying and aviation, and he was also incredibly proud of serving our country. So I wanted to follow in his footsteps, and I said, I want to be a pilot. And my dad said, well, it's, that's flying lessons are really, really expensive. So if you want to fly, you have to go into the military and they'll teach you how to fly. And I said, okay, I'll go to the Air Force Academy. And he said, I think they fly in the Navy too. And he had remembered going to Annapolis when he was a Boy Scout. And he said, that is, just the most wonderful service academy. And I think you should look at the Naval Academy. And I have to be honest, I'm sure he did not think this conversation was going to be really a sort of life-changing conversation for me. I'm sure he was just kind of having a conversation and thought it would go nowhere. And I said, well, I'll go to the Naval Academy. And he said to me at that time, well, I'm not sure that they have women at the Naval Academy. And because I was in 5th grade, I said, well, I'll figure it out. I'm sure it'll be fine. But sure enough, they did allow women. And I grew a lot of the time I was growing up, we moved around, but a lot of the time I was growing up, I was in Northern Virginia, a suburb of DC. So there were a lot of Academy grads, and one of my friend's dads took my friend and I to all the Navy games in Annapolis. And I decided that that is what I wanted to do. So I'm just looking now at the screen. That's when I was a midshipman. And that's a picture as I was a midshipman. I graduated in 1994 with the first class of women to be, oh no, actually, that was a postcard. Glennis, did you want to put the postcard? So that's from my plebe year. I just found that because I was looking for pictures to show to all of you. And that postcard says, "Dear family," this is an aerial view of the Naval Academy. And there's a little arrow that you might not be able to see that says, "I am here," which points to my dorm room. And the postcard says, this was from when I was a plebe, a freshman at the Naval Academy. And we didn't have any liberty or leave. So it said, I just thought you might like to see an aerial view of the boundaries of the prison complex I'm being kept at. I love you all, and I'll see you next weekend. So that was, I guess, how I felt about being a plebe at the Naval Academy. But I went on to graduate in 1994 with the first class of women who were allowed to go into combat, who many of the combat restrictions on things like our destroyers and our cruisers and many of our aircraft were lifted. And I really trace this. When I entered into Congress, there, I thought that's actually my ring dance. And this is how I know Jim Shanley. That's his nephew, Tom, who I dated at the Naval Academy. That's at the ring dance. And that's where we get our class rings. And so that was the dance to do that. And I was dating Tom at the time. So that's how we go back. And that's that. That's just another picture. Glennis is a midshipman. We can move on because I think that's a bad picture. Anyway, so I graduated, and I traced back when I entered Congress in 2018. I entered with another woman, Elaine Luria. Another woman was actually running in Kentucky as well, Amy McGrath. And all three of us had graduated from the Naval Academy in the early 90s. And mid to late 90s. So I was 94 and they were a bit younger. So I directly traced the lifting of the combat exclusion to our path that led us to run for Congress. Because I think before that, women were in support positions in the Navy and certainly weren't able to, I think, compete for positions and for jobs in the same way and with the same amount of respect. And so lifting that combat exclusion in 94, I think directly led to the fact that in 2018, we had 3 Naval Academy women running for Congress. Elaine and I were the first 2 women from the Naval Academy to enter into Congress. And we both serve on the House Armed Services Committee together. So I went on, I had always, as I mentioned, wanted to be an aviator. So I went down to do flight training I was in Pensacola, Florida, and Corpus Christi, Texas for my flight training. There I am in my helicopter. I flew the H-3 Sea King. I was deployed first from Norfolk. I deployed to Bahrain and Naples, Italy. That's where I started dating my current husband, and we ended up getting married. We were both there for the Kosovo War. I was flying out to the command ship in the Adriatic, and he was down there as an intelligence officer with the NATO staff. So I served there and then went on to be an admiral's aide. So I served, and that's a position where you sort of see how the big Navy is run. You come from a smaller squadron, and then you see I was an aide to the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the US Atlantic Fleet, which was very interesting. My first boss was a surface warfare officer, so I understood about how the surface Navy operated. And then he was promoted, and then my next boss was actually a submariner. And so I saw a bit about the running of the submarine Navy as well. And so that was a great experience to give me a really big picture of the operations of our Navy. After that, I went on to serve at the Commander-in-Chief of the US European Fleet, Cincus Navier, and the European Navy. And there I was a Russian policy officer, which, if you think about it, is really interesting, because there I was in the policy shop at the command headquarters, and I was the Russian policy officer as a lieutenant. And that just shows you at that time in the mid-90s where Russia was in our priority order. The wall had fallen, their economy wasn't doing very well. We thought they were going to become part of Europe and would be possibly one day one of our strong allies. And we were seeing that growth. We were not regarding them as much as sort of the threat that we had regarded them as during the Cold War. So a more junior person like myself was actually in charge of all of the interactions between the United States Navy and the Russian Federation Navy. I will tell you there were signs of trouble as I was serving, because as I went forward with this idea that we were working hard to make them better allies of ours, the Russians themselves were still incredibly suspicious. So I'll remember one event. I was serving at Cincus Navier in London, and I flew down to our bases down in Naples, Italy, and in Sigonella in Sicily. And I flew down there because I was helping if you remember, the SALT nuclear treaty negotiations. And in some of those negotiations, we had to open up our bases to show that we weren't keeping nuclear weapons there. And so on a sort of 24 or 48-hour inspection notice, we would then go down and host the Russians on our bases and show them that we did not have any nuclear weapons. So the Russians came down, I flew down to help host them. And we opened up the bases and we walked around with them and showed them that. And then we would have a dinner with the Russians and Italians after that. So I was sitting down and I was with this Russian officer who was probably part of the KGB or FSB. And I'm talking to him and I was just making small talk at the dinner table. And I said, oh, I really enjoy traveling. I've been to Moscow. I would love to travel to other parts of Russia. What do you suggest? And he looks at me, he just gives me this look and he goes, why? Almost like I was somehow trying to ferret out information from him. But that was sort of the relationship. We were looking at it as this relationship we were going to grow as allies. They were very suspicious. They were looking at every interaction they had with the United States military as an opportunity to collect intelligence on us. And so it was a very different experience. And it was interesting to me most recently as Russia invaded Ukraine to hear the reports that Germany had been trying to make Russia a better economic partner and saw them as moving forward as an ally. And I remember thinking as I was reading that, yeah, we tried that back in the 90s. It doesn't work so well. And certainly we've seen the results of that most recently. But I finished, that was my last tour in the Navy. And after that, that was a picture from when I was in Bahrain. We had landed in Kuwait to refuel because we flew throughout the Arabian Gulf. So that's in Kuwait, and that's a Kuwaiti officer there. That's when I was at, as you can see, we have the loops on our shoulders that we were all flag aides. So that was various flag aides when I was working for the Admiral in that picture. And so when I got out of the Navy, I had been very concerned because at the end of my tour was when we were invading Iraq, and we had also been engaged in torture and rendition. We'd opened up Guantanamo, and at that time, I really was very upset about that. I had been through prisoner of war school. As a pilot, you go through what's called SEER school. And it's like to train you in case you're shot down beyond enemy lines. And they interrogate you. They sort of beat you up a little bit, but so it can't show on your face because then they do interviews on TV. They just really simulate a lot of what would happen if you were captured by enemies. And so I went through SEER school, but I was assured that all of what the trainers at SEER school were doing were all things that other countries did, that the United States of America would never torture anyone, that we would never utilize these tactics, and that would always give us greater standing in the world community to argue for the release of our own prisoners. And so when I saw us doing the same things that we had seen modeled at SEER school, and in fact, several of the people that ran SEER school taught the government how to do this type of torture, I was really upset. So if you recall at that time, this was in the post 9/11 years, it was very difficult to argue against anything we were doing to fight terrorism because people were scared. And yet I felt very strongly that we really had to stand up against this kind of torture and rendition. And quite frankly, I think somebody who had a very powerful voice at that time, because he had been a POW, was John McCain, who also was fighting back against this type of torture and rendition, was very opposed to it. So I got out and decided to go to law school. So I went to Georgetown Law School and had decided that I was going to go join the Center for Constitutional Rights or another organization and really fight back against this type of behavior and against Guantanamo. And Neil Katyal, who's in legal circles a famous lawyer, he was one of my professors. He had defended a Guantanamo detainee, and I went up to him. I took all his classes at Georgetown. Everything I could learn. And I went up to him incredibly earnestly and said to him, I really want to go work on Guantanamo detainees and work here. And he sort of almost derisively said to me, well, first you kind of need to go learn how to practice law, don't you? So at that time, I started interviewing for law firms. That's when I went to work for Kirkland and Ellis. I found while I was working there that I really was attracted to working in a way that I felt was helping our country. So after that, I went to work for the US Attorney's Office. And at that time, I worked to set up the district's first federal prisoner reentry court, and then also worked as a federal prosecutor, helping to prosecute crimes throughout New Jersey with FBI agents and ATF agents, et cetera. So then after that experience, I decided I wanted to get into criminal justice reform. And I had been looking at, and interviewing for that. And then in 2017, decided to run for Congress. So that's sort of the background. I will just tell you, in Congress, I was a group of freshman military veterans. So we started the first ever bipartisan Veterans Caucus. I serve on the 4-Country Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of members of Congress who've served in our military. I also, as we say in the Navy, a plank owner or a founding member of the Service Women and Women Veterans Caucus. And I serve with Chrissy Houlihan and Elaine Luria and other women who are the group of a larger group of veterans. There have not been many women veterans in Congress. And it has been great because I believe strongly in bipartisanship, but you have to start, you can't kind of start with the broad, huge pieces of legislation. So starting with veterans legislation is something that we all agree on many times, and that's been very helpful. Also, as you heard, I serve on the Armed Services Committee. In fact, just last week, we passed the National Defense Authorization Act. And that has been an important thing just because of my background. And that is just an area of expertise that is helpful. And I think to the caucus, the Democratic caucus and the Congress as a whole. But then I also think it's really important for our district because Picatinny Arsenal in our district is one of the largest economic drivers of the 11th District of New Jersey. So Picatinny Arsenal brings in over $1.3 billion into the district. So I'll say the other, I'll just kind of end as we look towards getting to questions. I'll just have Glennis put up. Do you want to, yeah, I don't know how many of you, I've been told by Jim that many of you may recognize this place. And if anybody wants to put in the chat, maybe if they know where that is. I don't know if anyone recognizes, that is Bell Labs. So one of the most innovative places on the planet that we had right here in New Jersey. And I've heard that many of you are Bell Labs alumna. I will tell you, as I go throughout the district, we have a lot of major defense companies, a lot of really top-level scientific companies and optics and different lasers, different things like that. And without fail, a lot of senior management leadership comes out of the Bell Labs system. So what I'm so excited about now is fighting for those research and development dollars. We've just underinvested in this country in research and development for decades now, and really have been surpassed by China. So to see the ability now as people are getting engaged in research and development, I think that's going to be great for our district. And I'm proud to vote. I was proud to vote out of the House the Competes Act. Many of you have heard about that. That is a bipartisan piece of legislation in conference now. We're hoping to pass it next month. But that will be the largest investment in American innovation in a generation. So it'll help fund cutting edge research in New Jersey, help our manufacturers incorporate advanced technologies, and keep American companies and our economy competitive worldwide. So I'm really excited about that. And then, you know, something that's on everyone's mind and has been really difficult here in the district has been inflation and affordability. As many of you know, affordability in our district has always been an issue, which is why from day one, I've been fighting to get rid of the state and local tax deduction cap and ways that we can really lower costs, fighting hard for the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the federal government will invest in our Gateway Tunnel project, which is critical. But right now, we've seen that become even more of an issue. So to address the steep increase in gas prices, we've been putting pressure on oil companies to increase domestic production. So far, we've seen BP increase their domestic production by 25%. They're looking to increase it by 40% as a whole. Price gouging is something that we're also tackling. So we passed the Consumer Fuel Price Gouging Prevention Act, and we've urged the Senate to pass that. As you look at other times when barrels were this expensive, you don't see this kind of price increase at the pump. So we're trying to make sure that while we address prices at the pump, we're not seeing our oil companies take those profits. I'm also deeply concerned about the environment, and I do believe strongly we need to reach zero emissions. But we have just seen one of our power companies have a zero emissions natural gas plant. So I do think we need to look at all of the technologies to see. Right now, it's not at a point where the price point is still way too high. But I think with a mix of gas and natural gas, wind, solar, hydrogen, we really can't come to a point where with that mix, we can wean ourselves off Russian oil, for example. And in the National Defense Authorization Act, I helped secure provisions that reduce our reliance on Russian energy and put in place microgrids, for example, on our bases, while at the same time increasing our ability to help our European allies as we drive fuel prices down. With food prices, I'm a mom of 4 kids. So believe me when I tell you I've seen the price of groceries. If you guys haven't experienced it, maybe you haven't been to the grocery store, maybe you're not the one that does your family shopping. It has been, you know, you go, and I felt like the other day I went to just buy a few things for dinner and it was $200. It was really surprising. So what we've done is through the House, we've passed the Lower Food and Fuel Cost Act. That'll help bring fertilizer costs down to get fertilizer out to our agricultural community. It combats the anti-competitive pricing practices of our meat packing and meat industry to increase competition there to bring the price of beef down, and it expands access to cheaper biofuels at the pump. So I've also supported the bipartisan innovation bill that targets some of the major drivers of inflation, such as supply chain disruptions, high cost of chips, and issues with the agricultural industry, making our supply chain more resilient. So with all of that, I'm happy to get to questions. I'm also happy to talk about Ukraine. We have one of the largest Ukrainian American communities here in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, and we've been working closely with them. And I'll just let you know that we have a local connector, the primary cannon being used by the Ukrainian Army right now. The American M777 howitzer was developed right here in Morris County at Picatinny Arsenal. And Picatinny currently has people supporting the artillery guns being sent to Ukraine. And it's responsible for every single piece of ammunition that the United States has sent to Ukraine today. So to close, I want to say that the most important part of my job is delivering on constituency services. So if you're an NJ11 resident and you have an issue with a federal agency, maybe it's Social Security, the VA, the IRS, or more, my casework team can assist you. So I just want to make sure you have the number to my office in the event you have any concerns, federal concerns that we can help you with. So that's 973-526-5668. 973-526-5668. And again, that's for concerns with things like Social Security, the VA, the IRS, and more. So with that, I'm going to turn it over.
So we have just a few minutes for questions. We have 4 questions online, and you can raise your hand in the room For questions in the room, if you just speak out there, she won't hear the question at all. Either you have to come up here or make your question short and we'll repeat it. So we'll start with Larry Cunningham. You were first out of the box. So go for it, Larry. Got to unmute.
All right, unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Congresswoman, that was very impressive background. I wish I wish your kind of skills and capabilities were a little more widespread throughout our Congress and excuse me. Anyway, 2 points. One is from about 2000 to about 2000.
Larry.
To Vladivostok, because Vladivostok was supposedly a place where we were doing some contracting of local services. Anyway, having to just take a quick look at the fleet there. The fleet looked a little rusty and a little bit decrepit. I was wondering what your impressions were if you had actually had a chance in the early 90s. That's number one. And then number two, question is, I presume a naval aviator means that a naval person needs to be able to fly and be able to fly on board or land on an aircraft carrier. Is there some percentage of aviators who somehow have ability to fly but not ability to land on a aircraft carrier? 2 questions. So that's it.
Okay, so I'll answer the second one first. So I believe all naval aviators used to have to land on aircraft carriers as part of their basic training. Now, so I'm a helicopter pilot. So just about every helicopter pilot has landed on an aircraft carrier. Certainly everyone could. An aircraft carrier for a helicopter pilot's kind of a big platform. All of the, we have a lot of carrier aircraft. The hardest to land on the carrier are our prop planes, like the E-2. The jets are easier. They're not easy by any means, but easier. The prop planes are a lot harder to land on an aircraft carrier because of different lift issues. The planes that would not, the aviators that would not have landed on an aircraft carrier would be people flying some of our large cargo aircraft. Obviously, they don't land on aircraft carriers, and our P3s, they don't land on, our large aircraft don't land on aircraft carriers, and there's no longer a requirement in basic training to do the carrier landings. And as far as helicopter pilots, the tough part, because my helicopter was pretty large, I flew a Sea King, which was a pretty large helicopter. So it was always tough landing on frigates. They're a really small deck. And that was always the biggest challenge. And then as far as the fleet, I didn't hear all of your question. You cut out a little bit, but I think you had seen the fleet and it was in rusty condition, maybe in the early 2000s in Vladivostok. And what is my impression of it? Even during the Cold War, when Russia was incredibly competitive, there were always these tricks they did to make us think their fleet was bigger and better than it was. And sometimes it was a little bit of a mirage. And I think something that we saw really clearly was Ukraine. In Ukraine, not only was their prowess as a fleet somewhat of a mirage initially, but even some of what they could do militarily. Now, unfortunately, they're gaining ground, and they are learning as they go, and they are getting better and better, as we've seen in Ukraine. But I do remember at the outset, I had a briefing from a gentleman who was a former ambassador to Ukraine. And he was saying, we thought Russia was the second best military in the world, and now we find they're just the second best military in Ukraine. Obviously, their supply chain issues were really problematic. I don't think a lot of their military members knew they were getting into a war. They thought they were going to an exercise. We were just seeing severe morale issues and stuff. Now we are seeing, unfortunately, that the Russians have kind of, they pulled back from the western part. They've redeployed. They've had success in the eastern part of Ukraine, and now we see them coming back into the western part of Ukraine. So we're working very hard to address some of those issues and how to help the Ukrainians manage that. And I know the president was just with the G7, and we'll be going to Spain to see our NATO allies so they can discuss how to move forward with Ukraine.
Okay, it's actually 10:30 right now, and we would love to ask you more questions, but we did agree to end it at 10:30 if you have to go. So at this point, Mikie and Glynis, because she's helping Mikie run this, it's your call how many more questions to take. So if we get at least one more in.
Okay, I've got to get on the road, but let's do one more question and I will try to keep the answer tight. And I apologize because I would love to, this went by really fast, a lot faster than I thought. So
Good.
I'll have to get back to see you guys, but I'll do one more.
Okay, fine. And it'll come from Steve Varley himself.
Thank you, Paul. Representative Sherrill, currently the People's Republic of China has more surface ships than the US Navy, and they just began construction on a third aircraft carrier, this one based on catapult technology. How troubled are you? And what, if anything, should we be doing about it?
So I'm very troubled. I will tell you, I've been to several tabletop exercises on about Taiwan and what that looks like and if China invades Taiwan and what we do. And I'll tell you, one of the most troubling things is when you are dealing with China, it's just the amount of ships and aircraft and munitions that they have. And I think that as I speak to the military, we're constantly having briefings on the House Armed Services Committee from our military on what they need going forward and how they're going to modernize. We have been in a 20-year war, our nation's longest war in Afghanistan. And that was just to give you a sense of what that looks like on the military side here at home, the domestic production side. I had manufacturers in my district who were remanufacturing blasting caps, which is probably like 1960s, 1970s technology. The blasting caps company, we had warehouses full of them. They went out of business in the 80s. And then we went through all of them. So they're remanufacturing. So putting our technology into remanufacturing 1970s, 60s technology, as opposed to modernizing. So now we're in a huge modernizing effort now that we're out of Afghanistan. And the constant discussion is how do we best deploy our resources? And I have to tell you, I'm in constant, I won't call them fights, I'm in constant conversations with our military about how they have to do procurement better. We aren't, this isn't the days of the Cold War where all technology is produced by our military. There is so much good off-the-shelf technology that our military has to use if we're going to do this more cheaply, more efficiently, and better. And it's still really difficult. I always say, I'm a Navy girl, but we have the Picatinny Arsenal. So I'm on the Army base a lot. And now I say, there's the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way. And we've got to get everyone doing it the right way. And they want to do it the Army way sometimes. So really trying to make that modernization thing and trying to get our defense companies involved with some of our great tech companies. That's what China does. They have a whole of government effort. There's no like defense and technology, and there's no silos. It's a whole of government effort to move forward. And we need to do that here. And that's a constant focus of mine is how do we do the best technology? I'll just leave you with this because I did promise to be quick and I do have to get on the road. What China is doing is looking at what the United States has and trying to defeat that technology. What I'm afraid and what I'm fighting against right now is what I'm afraid the United States is doing is looking at what China has and trying to replicate that. That is a lead from behind, we're already behind the power curve, right? If we're just trying to catch up. We need to look at what China has and come up with new technologies to defeat it, not just match them. So that's kind of my fight right now and my concern. But I just want to thank you guys all for having me today. I look forward to seeing you again, and hopefully next time we'll be in person. And until then, take care, and please do make sure you have my number in the event you have any constituent concerns that you need addressed. But thank you
so much. And if you have 60 seconds more, Jim Shanley wants to give our formal thank you.
Okay.
Mikie, the orchid was adopted as a symbol of the Summit Old God because Summit was the orchid capital of the East in 1930 when the organization was founded. As we are happy to take this way of expressing our gratitude to you for the contribution you have made to our organization, our certificate of appreciation. I will see that this gets delivered to you, but this is what we have in any event.
Well, that's
Thank you.
beautiful. Thanks so much, Jim. I will hang that in my office when I receive it. And I just want to thank all of you. This has really been enjoyable.
Thank you again, Cheryl.
Thank you. Have a good one.